Muirfield Village, Memorial Week. But something felt different this year. The tension wasn't out on the fairways. It was inside a quiet room near the 18th green. Jack Nicklaus stood face-to-face with the man running the PGA Tour, Brian Rolapp, and watching every single move were 47 of the best players in the world. The air was thick. You could hear a pin drop. This wasn't a casual chat. This was a challenge. The 18-time major champion had a question. Not about the weather, not about the course setup, a question about the very foundation of the tour. And when Nicklaus asked it, the room went completely silent. Instead of a straight answer, Brian Rolapp gave him nothing, just silence. But here's the catch. What exactly did Nicklaus ask that made the CEO freeze? And why did those 47 players walk away feeling uneasy about what they just witnessed? Forget the polite press releases and the corporate talk. This moment cut deep into the future of professional golf. It's about everything you care about: the schedule, the signature events, the majors, and whether the traditions we grew up watching are slowly being pushed aside. Something is shifting right in front of us, and this silence at Muirfield might just be the turning point. Now, from my perspective, this silence spoke louder than any words ever could. But I'm curious, do you think the players should have stepped in and said something? Drop your take in the comments. And if you want the full breakdown of why this moment changes everything, hit that subscribe button. Because this story is far from over. That silence in that room wasn't just awkward, it was a message. And to understand why, we need to rewind 24 hours. The day before, Jack Nicklaus sat in front of the press at his own tournament, the Memorial, an event he built from the ground up. He was asked about the new schedule changes the tour was pushing forward, and instead of giving the usual diplomatic answer, Nicklaus did something rare for him. He spoke his mind openly. "I don't want to comment on the tour's schedule because I'm not exactly in favor of what they're doing right now," he said. Then he paused. The reporters leaned in. They knew that phrasing meant he was about to say something real. "But I do want to sit down with Brian and Jay and have that conversation," he continued. That was the warning shot, a public one, and everyone in the golf world heard it loud and clear. Nicklaus specifically pointed to the Florida swing, the Cognizant Classic, formerly known as the Honda Classic. He explained that this tournament used to have a strong field every year, but now look at where it sits on the calendar. Wedged between Pebble Beach, Los Angeles, Tiger's event, Bay Hill, and the Players' Championship. What chance does that tournament have? Nicklaus asked that question directly, and he wasn't just talking about Cognizant, he was talking about every traditional event that's being squeezed out by the signature events and the massive purses. "I hate to see tournaments bunched too much together, with too many big tournaments too close together," he said. "That's a problem, and I think that's going to be a problem for the tour in the future." He wasn't just being nostalgic, he was pointing out a logistical nightmare. When tournaments are packed together, players get exhausted. They skip events to save themselves. The fields weaken. The fans lose interest, and the tournament that's been running for 50 or 80 years suddenly becomes an afterthought. Nicklaus also mentioned player fatigue. He said that when he was playing, he could compete 3 weeks in a row, maybe 4, but then he needed to recharge. "Everyone needs to recharge," he explained. "You pack all these tournaments into one stretch, then leave the rest of the year empty. That's difficult for the players and difficult for the fans." That press conference was the spark, but what happened the next day turned that spark into an inferno. Here's where the story shifts, where the tension escalates. Because Nicklaus wasn't just talking to reporters, he was setting the stage for a direct confrontation. Let me take you inside that room at Muirfield Village. Wednesday morning, the day after Nicklaus publicly challenged the tour's direction. Brian Rolapp, the man brought in from the NFL to modernize the PGA Tour, had flown in specifically for this meeting. Jay Monahan was also there, and Nicklaus walked in with a clear purpose. What happened next would be talked about for years. Nicklaus sat down across from Rolapp. The room was filled with players. Not just a handful, 47 of them, some of the biggest names in golf, standing along the walls, leaning in to hear every word. This was not a private conversation behind closed doors. This was a public airing of grievances, and everyone wanted to witness it. Nicklaus looked at Rolapp and spoke calmly. He asked a simple question. "Why are you compressing the schedule? Why are you squeezing the traditional events until they can't breathe? What chance does a tournament like Cognizant have when you put it between Bay Hill and the Players?" That was the question. Direct, honest, and impossible to dodge. Rolapp sat there. He didn't respond immediately. And then he did something nobody expected. He said nothing. Literally nothing. He just stayed quiet. The silence stretched. Players shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at each other, trying to read the room, but Rolapp's face gave nothing away. Finally, one of the players broke the tension. "Are you going to answer him?" he asked. Rolapp just shook his head. He wouldn't give Nicklaus an answer. Not because he didn't have one, but because any answer he gave would expose the divide between his vision and what the traditionalists believe. The silence was his answer, and that answer spoke volumes. But why did he refuse to engage? Why wouldn't he at least address the greatest player of all time? Here's what you need to understand about Brian Rolapp. He came from the NFL, 22 years there. He knows how to structure a sports league for maximum value. His background is media rights, broadcasting deals, commercial optimization. He wasn't hired to protect traditions, he was hired to grow revenue, and his vision for the PGA Tour is radically different from what Nicklaus built. Rolapp's three core principles are parity, scarcity, and simplicity. That sounds corporate, but let me translate. Parity means every event should have equal weight. Scarcity means fewer tournaments, but each one bigger and more important. Simplicity means a cleaner schedule that's easier for casual fans to follow. In theory, that sounds reasonable, but in practice, it's a nightmare for the traditional events that built this tour. By 2028, Rolapp wants to split the tour into two tiers, the Championship Series and the Challenger Series. Players would move between them based on performance. The signature events would have massive purses, $20 million or more. The other events would be considered minor leagues, essentially. This is what Nicklaus was fighting against. He knows that once you create that separation, the traditional tournaments lose their relevance. Players will skip them to focus on the big money weeks. Fans will stop caring about the smaller events, and 80 years of history gets reduced to a footnote. Rolapp understands this perfectly, but he believes it's necessary for the tour to compete with other sports leagues. The NFL, the NBA, they all have compressed seasons that maximize media value. Rolapp is applying that same model to golf. The problem is, golf isn't like other sports. The PGA Tour isn't one league with a single season. It's a collection of individual tournaments, each with its own identity and history. And when you compress everything into a few months, you lose that diversity. Now we come to the moment that really defined this entire saga. Because Nicklaus wasn't done, and what he said next cut straight to the heart of the problem. Jack leaned forward. His voice was calm but firm. "I'm not invested in the 15 or 20-year window," he said. "But the players in this room are, and they need to know where this tour is heading." That line hit hard. He was 86 years old. He wasn't fighting for himself. He was fighting for the younger players, the ones who are going to live with the consequences of this new direction. Rolapp still didn't answer. The room stayed silent. Players started glancing at their watches, at each other, at the floor. You could feel the frustration building. Finally, Nicklaus got up. He shook hands with Rolapp, nodded at Monahan, and walked out without getting any real answers. And that's the moment the 47 players realized something. The decision had already been made. They weren't there to have a conversation. They were there to be told what was happening. But here's what Rolapp didn't fully anticipate. When you disrespect the legend, you lose the locker room. Those players walked out of that room with a new perspective. They saw the CEO, a man from the NFL with no background in golf, refuse to even acknowledge the concerns of the greatest champion the sport has ever produced. Let's talk about those 47 players for a moment. Every single one of them had grown up watching Nicklaus. They knew his records. They knew his legacy. They respected him in a way that no executive could command. And watching Rolapp ignore him, watching him refuse to even answer a direct question, sent a clear message. This is not a partnership. This is not a collaboration. This is a takeover. Nicklaus's concerns weren't just personal gripes. He was pointing out something structural that will affect every player in that room. When signature events dominate the schedule, the middle-tier players suffer. They lose access to big purses. They lose sponsor visibility. They lose the chance to build momentum through a full season. And the fans lose too. Because when Jordan Spieth and Scottie Scheffler skip Colonial, the event loses its magic. When Brooks Koepka drops out of a traditional event to save himself for the Memorial, the fans in that city get a weaker product. And they know it. This is the cycle that's already starting. Colonial is just the first casualty. But if nobody intervenes, it will become the pattern. Think about it. We just watched 4 of the biggest names in American golf skip Colonial. Scheffler, Spieth, Koepka, and Clark. A tournament that's been running for 80 years. And the reason isn't lack of interest. It's scheduling pressure. Scottie Scheffler missing the event was strange because he's from Texas. The fans love him there. He belongs at Colonial, but he has to manage his body and his schedule. You can't play every week. Jordan Spieth skipping Colonial felt even more unusual. He's emotionally connected to Texas golf. He's played this event so many times. But again, the schedule forced his hand. Wyndham Clark just won the Byron Nelson at TPC Craig Ranch. He had momentum, he was playing great golf, but he still withdrew. Why? Because the risk of burnout outweighed the benefit of another tournament. And Koepka. Let's talk about Koepka. His situation is different. He's a returning member from LIV Golf. He doesn't automatically get access to signature events. He has to qualify through the Aon Swing 5 standings. And right now, he's about 20 points outside the cutoff. If Koepka played Colonial and then qualified for the Memorial, he would be facing 7 consecutive tournament weeks. 7. That is brutal, especially with the US Open just around the corner. So he made a choice. He withdrew from Colonial to rest. But here's the thing. When Koepka withdrew, it affected 2 other players. Blair and Patrick Fishburn were the first alternates. If Koepka had stayed in the field, the tournament would have expanded to include them. But when he pulled out, they were left out. 1 decision by 1 player, and 2 careers got impacted. That's how fragile this system has become. And this is exactly what Nicklaus was warning about. He wasn't just talking about his own feelings. He was pointing out a system that's broken. The tour is currently structured around signature events and majors. Everything else feels secondary. The problem is, you can't have a tour with only elite events. You need the smaller tournaments to develop talent. You need them to give players a chance to earn their cards, to gain experience, to build a following. But right now, the smaller events are getting squeezed. Players are skipping them, sponsors are getting nervous, and fans are starting to lose interest in the weeks that don't have a signature event attached. Rolapp's solution to this problem is interesting. His approach is not to create equality across all events, but to make the smaller events more focused on developing talent, while the bigger events become the Super Bowls of golf. In his model, the Challenger Series would serve as a proving ground for young players. The Championship Series would be where the best of the best compete for massive purses. On paper, this makes sense. The NFL has a similar structure with preseason, regular season, and playoffs. But golf is different. Golf is built on history, and you can't just cut 80 years of tradition because it doesn't fit a spreadsheet. This is the core conflict, and it won't be resolved in one meeting at Muirfield. But that meeting changed something in the air. The players who witnessed that silence understand the stakes now. They know that Nicklaus fought for them, and they know that Rolapp wouldn't give ground, not even to the legend. So where does this leave us? Right here, right now. Golf is at a crossroads. The traditionalists want to preserve the schedule, the tournaments, the way things have always been. The modernizers want to compress, consolidate, and compete. Both sides have valid arguments, but the silence in that room represents the distance between them. Nicklaus asked a fair question. He asked why traditional events were being sacrificed. He asked why player fatigue wasn't being considered. He asked why the tour was pushing forward without listening to the people who built it. Rolapp didn't answer, not because he was rude or dismissive. He didn't answer because his vision and Nicklaus's vision are fundamentally incompatible. You cannot compress the schedule without damaging the smaller events. You cannot create elite tiers without making some events feel second class. You cannot modernize without upsetting the people who love the tradition. And that's the tragedy of this moment. The silence at Muirfield wasn't just awkward. It was the sound of 2 worlds colliding, 2 visions of golf fighting for the same space, and 47 players caught in the middle, wondering which future they're going to inherit. Let me ask you this question directly. Do you think Nicklaus was right? Are the signature events hurting traditional tournaments? Or is Rolapp's vision what the tour needs to survive in a competitive sports landscape? From my perspective, the silence at Muirfield was a missed opportunity, an opportunity for dialogue, an opportunity to find common ground, an opportunity to respect the past while building toward the future. But instead, we got silence. And silence, in this context, is not neutrality, it is a choice. Now we have a choice too. As fans of this sport, we can accept the new direction, or we can speak up, just like Nicklaus did, and demand that the traditions we love be respected. Because if we don't, if we stay silent like that room did, we'll wake up one day and realize that the tournaments we grew up watching are gone, replaced by something more efficient, more profitable, but less meaningful. Colonial at 80 years old, Muirfield, the Honda Classic. These events aren't just dates on a calendar, they're part of our history, they're part of what makes golf special, and if we lose them, we lose a piece of the sport itself. Nicklaus did his part. He spoke up. He asked the hard questions. He stood in front of 47 players and showed them what it means to fight for something you believe in. Now it's our turn. Are we going to watch in silence, or are we going to speak up? I want to know what you think. Do you believe the tour is heading in the right direction, or are we watching the slow death of traditional golf? Drop your opinion in the comments. Let's actually have the conversation that Rolapp wouldn't have. And if you made it this far, if you truly care about the future of the PGA Tour, hit that subscribe button. We're going to keep covering every twist, every turn, every decision that shapes the game we love. Because this story isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning. The question now is simple. What happens next? Will the players unite? Will someone challenge Rolapp's vision head-on? Or will the silence continue to spread, filling rooms and tournaments, until there's nothing left to say? We don't know the answers yet, but we do know one thing for certain. The next few months will define the PGA Tour for the next decade, and everyone in that room at Muirfield knows it. Nicklaus asked the question. Rolapp refused to answer, and 47 players walked away changed. Where do you stand?